The rate of redshirting has barely budged in the last 2 decades,
Wow.
staying at about only 5% of kindergartners that are redshirted on average each year. These rates are quite comparable to redshirting rates from the 90s and 2010s. So even back then, it was just 5 to 7% of kindergartners. Hey, I'm Crystal Luce, professor of education.
And I'm Aimee Ketchum, pediatric occupational therapist.
Welcome to Plant the Seed of Learning, the podcast where we merge education and medical models to bring you science-based, practical insights on all things early childhood.
Whether you're a parent, teacher, therapist, or policymaker, we're here to help you support children from the start.
Thank you for joining us today. For those of you listening and watching on YouTube, today we are going to discuss a hot topic right now pertaining to kindergarten. Many parents struggle with the decision to send their children to kindergarten if they have summer birthdays. Myself being one of them, I had a summer birthday child. More on that later. Today we're going to review some research on the topic. Research in general tells us that children should stay home as long as possible, but with changing dynamics, including two working parents in most households, a new story is unfolding. And the rising cost of childcare can often influence those decisions. So recently, we came across some research pertaining to redshirting. So many of you who will think that I'm talking about sports when we're talking about redshirting. This is typical for collegiate athletes who want to delay or suspend competition for 1 year to preserve their eligibility, allowing them to compete for 4 seasons over a 5 year period. During this year, athletes can practice and train just like a 4 year old trains for kindergarten. So let's just throw a fact or fiction out there.
Okay.
Is redshirting a rising trend?
Oh, that's actually fiction. I think
Yeah.
that people think it's a trend because we may be hearing about it more, but the answer is
Mhm.
actually no, it's not rising.
Right. So good. The rate of redshirting has barely budged in the last 2 decades,
Wow.
staying at about only 5% of kindergartners that are redshirted on average each year. These rates are quite comparable to redshirting rates from the 90s and 2010s. So even back then, it was just 5 to 7% of kindergartners, indicating that this practice is still uncommon despite a rise in the rhetoric pertaining to it over the past few years. So let's talk about it. Redshirting is the practice of voluntarily postponing a child's entrance into kindergarten by 1 year, despite them being age eligible, to allow for 1 year to further develop social, emotional, and even physical maturity. Because some people hold their children back because they want to, or they're hoping their kids will be better at sports if they just wait a little bit longer. This is typically applied to children with summer birthdays, and it aims to give them an advantage by being older and more developed.
Yeah. So, let's dig a little bit deeper into this topic and this trend. So today we're going to actually review some research from a brief that's called "Should Kindergartners Be Redshirted? Costs Outweigh Academic Benefits." This is by Megan Kufield and Sophia Postel, from March of 26, just came out.
Mhm.
So let's talk about some of the key findings. They found that over the last decade, 5% of kindergartners were redshirted on average, and the rate peaked in the fall of 2021 at 6.4. I guess we can all guess why that would
Mhm.
have been. Likely had a lot to do with the COVID pandemic. So
Mhm.
while students and boys were most likely to be redshirted, um, redshirting was also more common in low poverty and rural schools.
Okay.
So, while it's more common in boys, we're seeing it again more common in more low socioeconomic areas and rural school districts. The academic advantages of redshirting actually fade pretty quickly. So I think this is a really key piece that we need to discuss today, and I think parents really need to understand. You
Mm,
think, the child will go into school ahead of their peers because they've had that extra year to grow and mature and learn the skills necessary for kindergarten. But what we're finding, what sort of the long-term longitudinal data is telling us that these advantages are going to fade pretty quickly. And
mhm.
by third grade, the redshirters are scoring equivalent to their peers who entered school on time.
So true. I'm wondering, you mentioned rural schools,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's more common in rural schools. And I think sometimes parents aren't aware that kindergarten is starting if they're in a rural area because they're far away from the schools, and
Yeah.
it could be an accidental redshirting that even
Oh,
happens.
that's so interesting. And I know that happens because I was recently at a rural school participating in their kindergarten registration, and they were a little surprised by the low numbers of parents that were coming in to register their children. And they said that sometimes they get kids coming in like a week after school starts with
Hmm.
parents saying, "Oh, we saw a school bus in the neighborhood," and thought, "Oh, I guess it's time to send her to school." So so yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Uh-huh. And sometimes they just think, oh, I guess it's not necessary. It's
Right.
not required.
Yeah.
So why not give them another year at
Yes.
home?
Yeah, for sure.
So there's an April review of research from the Hechinger report. And in this research, as I was perusing it, they quoted a parent. And I'll give you that quote. In my local school district, children must be 5 years old on or ahead of September 1st before they enroll in kindergarten. With a late September birthday, my son was only a few weeks too young to make that cutoff. So birthdays after the cutoff make this decision easy for some parents. If you have a September 2nd birthday, it's too late. You just don't even think about it because the cutoff is September 1. But those with a June, July, or August birthday often face a totally different reality. And many decide to keep their children at home. I know sometimes practicing teachers aren't as eager to get those younger kids into the classroom because sometimes they're a bit more immature. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding with active boys that they need more time to mature when in reality they're just active boys and they're going to be active until third grade, till some of
Mhm.
those energies calm down. My son had a June birthday,
Okay.
but he was socially ready and academically ready. And so as much as I thought this would be great because I was home on a maternity leave to stay home with him, I knew I had to send him because he would have been bored.
Yes. Yeah, working as an occupational therapist in early intervention, I get asked this question a lot. Do you think my
Hmm.
child is ready? Should we wait a year? Should we hold the child back? Should we send him? More often than not, I say, let's send him. Give him a
Hmm.
chance. What I see so often in the classroom is, you see a child at home, there might be more behavioral issues and feel like there's more discipline required. You might see what you perceive as immaturity, but when they get into a classroom with the peers, they rise to the occasion. They model after their peers and they usually end up doing really well. And of course, there's always exceptions to that, but
Hmm.
from what I've seen being in so many classrooms and kind of following children from birth to kindergarten, um,
Hmm.
I see a lot of parents having a lot of apprehension, but then children really rising to the occasion and modeling, with
Hmm.
children that have more skills. So, and it's a great way to kind of keep them socially engaged with other children their
Yeah.
age. Um,
You
and
nailed it. Those older children in the classroom are models for the younger ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they want to learn. They want to, be engaged. And sometimes when we hold them back, they get bored.
Hmm.
They get
Mm.
restless and they get bored and they're not getting that stimulation that they would get if they
True.
went to kindergarten. Now, if they're in like a intensive preschool program or a kindergarten readiness sort of program, pre-K count, something that might be a little bit different. Again, it's case by case, and you have to look at each child individually and look at if there's other developmental delays and
Yeah.
what sort of therapy is involved and get opinions from everybody, but there's
Mhm.
always a lot to consider.
There
And
truly is. I'll say, as a former kindergarten teacher, I couldn't
yeah,
have told you who was younger or older in my room. I
uh-huh.
didn't pay as much attention to the birthdays unless we were celebrating their birthday in the
Right.
class, of course. But I really gave children the benefit of the doubt and knew that they would progress. And sometimes the younger children outshine the older children, believe it or not, with their
Oh yeah.
academic skills and
Oh, I
social
believe
awareness.
that. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as we know from the data and this research and
Mhm.
this article we're talking about, for the average child, they're not going to get that much of an advantage, and they're likely going to lose that advantage by third grade anyway. Um, so
Mm.
one of the authors of this article, Megan Kufield, one of the director of growth modeling and data analytics of this study. Um, Said that the measures of academic progress or MAP tests that are used by tens of thousands of schools across the country are really finding that, they might have a little advantage academically when they first start, but again,
Mhm.
they're not seeing that by third grade. And they
Mhm.
studied the 3 million students who took the kindergarten through second grade MAP growth assessment between 2017 and 2025. And they also followed a cohort of students who started kindergarten in the 2021-2022 school year to see what their test results look like when they were in third grade. And then they compared that to when they entered school.
Mhm.
And so interesting. So students who started kindergarten a year later than their peers had measurable advantages in reading and
Mhm.
math compared to the average academic growth of kindergartners. Um, the academic advantage by the redshirted children represented a 20 to 30% of an academic year of learning. But again, that advantage um, pretty much went away by the time they entered third grade. So
Yeah.
those children who had been held back a year were completely indistinguishable from their peers academically at the beginning of third grade. So again, I think, that's really something for parents to consider if they're holding their child back, to think like, they're going to be more competitive in the college search, or they're going to be, more competitive in high school. They're going to graduate sooner, things like that. That's definitely not what we're seeing. So
Mhm.
there's a lot to consider, but that is one of the things that makes a big difference.
I love how you connected it to the college search. I mean, we're talking about 5-year-olds, and
Yeah,
sometimes parents do start to think about college.
yeah,
And I was in a school district, and I know that some families start tutoring children in kindergarten
yep,
really early because they're not excelling or moving beyond their peers, when
yeah,
really you just have to give them some time. You can see by this study that by third grade, children usually catch up and they're equals by third
yeah,
grade, typically, no matter the advantage
yeah.
initially noticed.
That's so interesting. And I'd love to look at some studies on their behavior,
Mhm.
because are they bored? Are they bored in kindergarten and first grade? And, are we
Mm,
seeing a
mhm,
difference in
mhm,
in their behavior and their social emotional skills because they're not necessarily with peers their age? Um,
yeah.
I know, that's a concern either way. Like, I have a niece who has actually skipped a few grades and she's thriving, but there's always that concern for the social emotional piece. When
Yeah.
you're with other children who are not the same age as you and just not in that same social emotional development as you
Mhm,
are, how that can really impact relationships and
mhm.
making friends and learning sort of those social skills. And
Yeah.
that's such an important piece of kindergarten.
There are some theories as to why the gains don't last. One of them is related to children having older peers. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. It is a good thing to have older peers in the classroom because they serve as academic and behavioral role models. So if your child is 5, an early 5-year-old who just turned 5 in June, July, August, or even, early September, you're going to have some kids who are going to turn 6 before your child, of course.
Uh-huh.
You're going to be five the whole kindergarten year.
Yep.
So those older children can be positive influences
Mm-hmm.
on your young 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
There's also benefits of starting school late, but they disappear when the
Yeah.
children get bored
Mm-hmm.
by the curriculum, as you were mentioning. So at first it may look great, but then they start to get bored because they've already surpassed the curriculum.
Yeah.
So even though they might be growing socially, you have to think about how are they going to be academically? And if they're bored in kindergarten, sometimes there's some outbursts that happen
Right.
because of boredom.
Right. Right.
Among the more surprising results of the study, for me, was that redshirting is relatively uncommon. Kufeld said the idea of holding children back gained more attention after a prominent author, Richard Reeves, wrote in 2022, so just after COVID, recommending that all boys be redshirted to give them an extra year for their brains to mature.
Wow.
Yeah. So she said that the study focused solely on academics and not behavioral outcomes or other factors. So it would be interesting to study behavioral outcomes. So you really need to look at your child and make the decision that works for your individual child.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are benefits to not sending kids to kindergarten when they're just turning 5 in the summer and everything works out. So it is an individual basis
Yeah.
based on where the children are.
Mm-hmm. That's such I need to dive a little deeper into that, but I feel like that's such a generalized thought process that all boys should be held back because not obviously not all boys are developing at the same, with the same skill set and at the same level. And what huge implications that would have long term for literally half of the population. So I just think that's so interesting. And yeah, no wonder that brought a lot of attention to this.
I know. And I can't help but think it has to be related to the COVID times
Yeah.
when those young boys didn't really interact with many other children.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely has a huge impact. And as we know, one of the most important things in a kindergarten readiness skill is that social emotional learning. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
there's just so much data out there that that's really the foundation, that, the ability to be self-regulated and wait your turn and, kind of understand the rules of kindergarten and control your body are so much more important than being able to learn ABCs and one, two, threes. But there's still parents out there using flashcards and teaching
Mm.
children to read at age 3, and sort of those, we call them splinter skills, that they're not developmentally on that trajectory where they're truly learning phonics and word structure, but they're learning to memorize a word, which is not going to serve them. And these are the things, again, that we start to see that all leveling out by 3rd grade when teachers are done unteaching and reteaching all of these skills, right? So
Mhm.
it's just so much to think about when we're talking about school readiness. Um, so we talked about the social implications of being older than your grade level peers, and they bring this up quite a bit in this article as well. And they also talk about, thinking ahead, like what does it mean to have your child be the first one of their friend group to go through puberty,
Mm.
or one of the oldest high school seniors? Some people think it could be a good thing, but you really need to think about how that can be challenging for the child as well. So, again, there's just so much to consider, and it's really a case by case basis. But as you said, there are some benefits of redshirting, holding children back. We do sometimes see higher maturity because they have that extra year to
Mhm.
academically and socially prepare for kindergarten. So if it doesn't backfire, we do see some higher maturity. We do have very short-lived academic benefits, where they might perform better academically in the very early grades than students who enter kindergarten on time. But again, those benefits don't hold up.
Mhm.
Um, And of course, probably one of the top reasons that people will redshirt in the first place is there is a potential advantage in sports. And some parents are really thinking about that when they're holding their child back with the intention of sort of giving them a leg up, since they're going to be a little older and more physically mature and developed than their peers when they are playing more competitive sports,
Hmm.
maybe like high school sports. And I mean, we could probably do an entire podcast just on that. I mean,
Oh,
so
yeah.
many children are sports specific from such an early age. I know in the medical world, we're seeing injuries in young children that we used to never see until they were college athletes or even professional athletes, like, you know,
Mhm.
blown out knees and rotator cuff tears. And, I think it's just so important to rotate through different sports in different seasons so that their bodies have that opportunity. But again, that's a whole nother podcast. But,
That is
it kind of,
amazing that you
yeah.
brought that up. I see that happening so much. I watched my kids playing sports and I watch families that focused on sports from such a young age and just one sport often. Kids focus on one sport.
Mhm.
And I will say a friend of mine had the opposite viewpoint and they didn't encourage sports with their boy. They encouraged him to go play in the woods and
Uh,
be a boy.
yes.
And so he developed later, but he's an amazing sports player, and he's playing basketball for University of Pennsylvania right now
Yeah.
because he was so good. But it wasn't because he started early.
Uh-huh.
It's because when he was developmentally ready, he started to engage more in sports, and there
Yes.
was still plenty of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I hear that too. I know I have some friends that have um, sons that are college athletes, and they had a very um, sort of system approach to ensuring that their children grew up to be safe, healthy athletes, where they sort of
Oh.
instilled early the love of the game and the rules of the game, but then didn't actually pad up and get out there and play till it was developmentally appropriate for them to do that. And then
Mhm.
also did different sports on the off seasons. So they were using
Mhm.
different muscles, different muscle groups, and using their body in different ways so that they weren't so prone to injury. And I think these two conversations do go hand in hand because there definitely is a percentage of parents who redshirt their kids in kindergarten with that in mind, really
Mhm.
wanting them to shine
Right.
as the high school athletes. And I mean, hey, who doesn't want a sports scholarship for their child? There's,
Exactly. We'll
yeah.
have to
So,
talk more about this another time,
right,
for sure.
right.
So there are some costs pertaining to redshirting, and the article specifically talks about extra childcare costs in the short term. So parents who redshirt their children are on the hook for providing or paying for an extra year of childcare. So either they're not working, they're staying at home another year, which that's someone's salary, or they're paying for an extra year of childcare, which is about 12,000 per year on average
Wow.
per kid.
Yep.
They've also connected redshirting with higher rates of high school dropout. I was shocked about this.
Yeah.
In the long term, being older for your grade can have some disadvantages by the time children reach high school because redshirted students will turn 18 before finishing high school, and there is a higher risk of dropping out of high school, according to some research. And we'll have to post the links in the show notes. And also potential impacts on earning, which is super interesting. And, if you just sit back and think about it, their lifetime earnings can be lower because they enter the labor force 1 year later than their peers. And I think about retirement. Like when you start working, you're socking money in your retirement account. So that's a whole year where you're not dumping money into your Roth, let's
Mhm.
say.
Yeah. Lots to
Yeah.
consider.
Lots to consider, sure.
Yeah, so if you haven't already put this together, we are pretty anti-redshirting. From Crystal's education background and my medical background, there's a lot of reasons why we think just send the child, give them a chance. But that being said, there are always some cases where children will benefit from redshirting. If a child has a significant developmental delay and you already have early intervention, working with the child, but it is sort of the team recommendation that they're just not ready and that
Mhm.
they still have a lot of physical development to do, and that they're just developmentally delayed and not ready, then that is one time where it might be beneficial. Also, children who majorly struggle with behavioral or emotional regulation. So if there's a significant delay there where there's not really an issue of being on the fence, should I send them, should I not? But everybody is in agreement that there is such a low level of regulation that that child is not going to be successful in kindergarten, then that's a case where redshirting might be appropriate. There is a lot more information out there. We will post some links in our show
Mhm.
notes for some more data and information. If this is something that you're questioning right now and you'd like to further educate yourself, we'll put some information out there.
Excellent. So, thank you, all of our listeners. We appreciate you joining us on Plant the Seed of Learning. We want to thank our guests, past and present, for sharing their knowledge and work. And a special thank you to our producer who works diligently to get our work out there. We really appreciate you, Penn Ketchum. You can find our podcast wherever you listen on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. We can't wait to learn from you and plant more seeds of learning together.
Thank you.